A hushed tension hung over the Boston conference hall as Karoline Leavitt took the podium, flanked by campaign banners and media crews. The lighting cast a hard gleam on her carefully powdered face as she launched into her speech. Her words, sharp and surgically placed, painted a distorted portrait of foreign leadership cloaked in disdain. Without naming him directly at first, her tone turned acidic when the image of Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, appeared on the screen. Behind her, this nation, she declared, should not be bending to the ideals of warlords who dress in military attire and pretend to be reformers. The room rippled with murmurs, a blend of applause and unease. But Karoline didn't waver. Her voice had that practiced resonance of someone who believed they were untouchable. That sentence, televised across multiple networks and clipped for social media, ignited a firestorm, not because of its volume, but because of its surgical disrespect, aimed precisely and unflinchingly. Somewhere across the ocean, Traoré watched the clip in silence, his fingers slowly folding the edge of a worn document on his desk. No visible reaction, no anger, just a long pause, as if measuring the weight of words that had landed thousands of miles away. The clip went viral overnight, framed by divisive headlines. In New York, a university student of West African descent watched it in stunned silence, her throat tightening as the word warlord rolled again through her headphones. In Texas, a young boy whose father served as a UN peacekeeper stared at the television, brows furrowed, wondering why a man who brought food to his village was being spoken of like a criminal. But it wasn't just the public sentiment that shifted. International legal observers began raising questions. Civil Liberties Coalition issued a statement accusing Leavitt of racial incitement under the guise of free speech. Traoré still made no comment. Instead, his official team quietly filed a defamation and incitement lawsuit in U.S. federal court, an $80 million claim. Leavitt laughed it off in a Fox interview, waving her hand like it was a mosquito buzzing around her spotlight. Himsu, she smirked, sipping from a mug that read, "No apologies." The first hearing was held under dim, rain-soaked skies. Karoline arrived in a spotless white blazer, her legal team polished and prepped. In stark contrast, Traoré entered alone, wearing a charcoal suit with a simple black tie. He nodded politely to the bailiff, but said nothing. The courtroom held that eerie quiet that comes not from absence of sound, but from too many people holding their breath. As legal teams laid out preliminary arguments, the judge, a composed black woman known for her silence and precision, listened without expression. "Words matter," she said, not looking up from her notes. "This court is not here to debate politics, but to determine harm." Karoline shifted in her seat. Her confidence hadn't yet wavered, but something in the judge's tone registered like a hairline crack on glass. What followed was a slow, methodical unfolding of a system's rotten layers. Through detailed testimonies and archived footage, the courtroom bore witness to decades of coded speech, racial double standards, and global misrepresentations. A flashback surfaced of a humanitarian mission that Traoré led, where he escorted international aid trucks through insurgent-held zones, unarmed, to protect civilians. A former translator testified that he witnessed Traoré give his coat to a child who had lost her parents in a raid. These moments weren't presented as grand heroics, but quiet truths buried under political noise. One of the most powerful moments came when a former black Marine who once served in Burkina Faso stood in uniform and said, "That man walked into our tents with no guards. He sat with us. He asked about our families. You don't forget that." The courtroom didn't erupt in applause. It simply held the silence a little longer. Dialogues were brief, yet piercing. A journalist on the stand recalled how Leavitt's words had emboldened fringe groups to publish racial slurs against African leaders. An internal affairs officer quietly admitted under oath that his department had flagged Leavitt's language multiple times as borderline incitement, but were pressured to stay silent. Karoline's team grew visibly tense. Her legal counsel asked for adjournments, citing media bias and political attacks. But the cracks were now visible, not in the court's rulings, but in Karoline's composure. Gone were the offhand smirks. Her hands, once confidently folded, now fidgeted under the desk. The climax of the trial didn't come in the form of shouting or outbursts. It began with a simple invitation from the judge. "Mr. Traoré, you may speak now, should you choose." The room grew still as he stood. His posture, dignified but unassuming, carried the gravity of a man who had been misunderstood far too long. His voice was steady and low. "When I was 14, a radio broadcast called my father a rebel. He had been a teacher. That label cost him his life. I learned young that a sentence can kill slower than a bullet, but far more permanently." He paused, letting the weight settle. "I did not file this suit for ego or money. I filed it because silence enables repetition." His words didn't rise, but they pierced. Caroline's eyes shifted downward. For the first time, she looked. Afraid not of him, but of the truth echoing louder than her platform. When the judge thanked him, he nodded once, then sat quietly. No dramatic exit. No flourish. During closing arguments, Leavitt's team tried to redirect the narrative. Political speech, they argued. Freedom of expression. But the court had seen enough. The judge, in her verdict, didn't scold or grandstand. She simply said, "Freedom of speech does not extend to the freedom to dehumanize." Damages were awarded $80 million. The court erupted, not in celebration but in clicks. Phones lit up. Headlines began forming mid-sentence. Karoline, motionless, stared ahead as her lawyers whispered frantically. Her shoulders dropped, just slightly, but enough to signal collapse. In the days that followed, Karoline's career began to quietly unravel. A major conservative think tank distanced itself from her. Former allies sent silent messages through omission, no retweets, no appearances, no callbacks. Her campaign donors withdrew support without explanation. She made no statement. Her social media accounts fell silent. Then came the interviews she refused. The podcast invitations she ignored. A single photo, leaked to the press, showed her sitting alone on her townhouse steps, staring blankly at a discarded newspaper featuring Traoré's face beside the verdict. Meanwhile, across the world, small shifts occurred. A school mural appeared in Ouagadougou, a painting of Traoré, surrounded by children. Beneath the words, "Dignity needs no volume." In Atlanta, the university student who had cried watching Karoline's speech stood in a classroom, presenting on media bias with renewed confidence. In Brooklyn, the translator from the Bronx launched a nonprofit providing cultural interpretation, training to local journalists. These ripples weren't loud, they weren't televised, but they mattered. Karoline's downfall wasn't cinematic in the traditional sense. It was quiet. She scrolled through old emails searching for support and found only promotions. Her daughter, once active on social media, deleted her profiles after classmates began mocking her mother's quotes. Her lawyer sent updates, but she never replied. The silence she once used against others now wrapped tightly around her life, suffocating without confrontation. One night, alone in her apartment, she watched Traoré's UN speech, the one she'd once mocked. He ended it by saying, "History bends, but slowly, and only when someone insists it must." She closed the laptop quietly, her breath shallow. Months later, Traoré declined a follow-up interview. Instead, he issued a single, public statement, published in a humanitarian journal. "This lawsuit was never about me," he wrote. "It was about the damage done when prejudice is treated as patriotism." He donated a portion of the awarded funds to international media literacy programs. No press conference, no victory tour. Just a photo of him walking beside children near a rural school, his hand resting gently on a child's shoulder. Karoline disappeared from the public eye. Her name, once plastered across headlines and political banners, faded into the background. Former colleagues spoke of her in the past tense. Her final public words were on a niche podcast where she confessed quietly, "I didn't think it would end like this." The host didn't respond. There was no need. The story closed, not with applause or vengeance, but with echoing silence, the kind that speaks more powerfully than any televised rant. Oh, oh, dot, lit, bubble, and the percent dollars on centivord, upset Tom. It breathed, quietly, persistently, permanently.